Welcome to the CAREcast.
Jago, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much for coming on the CAREcast. I wonder if you could just start by introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about your Christian story and what you're currently doing.
Of course, James, thank you. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be there. My name's Jago. I am married to Susanna. We've got 4 children who range in age from 14 to 4. So that has certainly kept us busy during lockdown, just in terms of homeschooling and a whole variety of 4 children who all go to 4 different schools, as well as trying to run a church. I'm the rector of Holy Trinity Clapham, so a church in Clapham, medium to largish size, about 600 people. In the church family before lockdown took place. In terms of my history, in terms of coming to faith and things like that, I as a teenager, I thought God was a killjoy. I thought he might exist, might not. I wasn't quite sure, but I thought the most safe thing to do was to keep him at arm's length, as far away from possible, and just try and have fun. And then age 17, one of my best mates got in touch with me and asked me to go on a Christian conference for people in their 6th form at school. And I thought it sounded incredibly boring. I couldn't think of a sort of more boring thing to do, but he was one of my best friends, and I couldn't think of an excuse not to go, and I didn't want to offend him. So I found myself going on this conference, not really knowing what to expect. And to cut a long story short, in essence, I was blown away by the evidence for Christianity on those 3 days. It was a bit like a sort of Alpha course or a Christianity Explored course squashed into 3 days. And there were talks and there were discussion times. And as I heard the evidence for Jesus, for who he is, proof of the resurrection, why he died on the cross, all those kind of things, I was like, this is true. I cannot get away from the fact that Jesus is who he claims to be. And I still thought God was a killjoy at that point, actually. And so it was quite a not quite C.S. Lewis-like, but it was a reluctant conversion. But I thought, this is true. God is who he claims to be. And so I prayed a prayer at age 17 then, asking Jesus to be my Lord and my Saviour. I'm now 43, so that's 26 years later. And there's a lot that's happened in that time. But if there's the one thing above all, I think, that I've learned over those 26 years is that God is not a killjoy, that he is my Heavenly Father who loves me, who cares for me, who wants the best for me.
And am I right in thinking in 2014 you had a book published which looks at Paul's letter to the Romans? Just remind me of the title.
You may well be right. Yeah, I don't know the year. You know the year better than me. So I've written a couple of books. The second one you're mentioning is called 100% Christianity, and that is going through Paul's letter to the Romans and really looking at the sort of broadly, how does the gospel impact all of life? How does it impact all of our mind, all of our heart, all of our actions, all that's going on in life? That it's not just this thing that we do when we go to church. So that's sort of the main theme of that. And I've also done another book before then. Again, can't remember the year. You may know, maybe 2009 possibly, called Working Without Wilting. And that's particularly focused on how to, for a Christian, particularly starting out in the workplace, how does one go through working life without wilting in one's faith? That was, for me, that was one of my big, it still is, but particularly as I became a Christian and I went through university and then went into work, I had a real passion. How do we help and encourage people to be full on for Jesus as in their workplaces, not just I'm a Christian on Sundays and I compromise in all sorts of ways during the week.
And I guess that's a very similar challenge that you're now dealing with in the midst of the coronavirus crisis. How do we as Christians, how do we as the church continue to shine for Jesus and be a witness for Jesus when we are suddenly unable to leave our houses as often as we would like and can't even meet as a church?
Yes.
So I wondered if you could just take a few moments and explain a little bit about what the last 10 weeks have been like for Holy Trinity Clapham.
Yeah, big question. What has it been like? The first, there's lots I could say. The first thing I think I'd say is it felt like crisis management to begin with. Suddenly it was lockdown, and yes, people knew it was coming, but suddenly very quickly it was, how does one steer a church that has been meeting in all sorts of different ways into a purely online presence? And that felt quite, that felt a challenge. And certainly for the staff team at HTC, it felt slightly all hands on deck, crisis management, trying to work out, God, Lord, give me wisdom. What should we do? And what should we not do? I think for myself, one thing I was very helped with quite early on was there was a friend of mine who said, church in online times is about three things: content, connection, and contribution. And actually, in some ways, the content bit is the easy bit. Right, we're putting this bit online, but actually, needing to work out how do we do connection? How do people actually still have that sense of church family, sense of brothers and sisters in Christ meeting with one another? How do you do that connection piece? And then also contribution. How does each member, if we believe in an every member ministry of each people using their gifts in the life of the church, how does actually each person contribute their gifts when everything is just happening on a screen? So those were the kind of things that I was trying to having to wrestle with, and we were having to wrestle with as a church. In essence, what did we do? We as quickly as possible went to an online church in terms of Sunday services and producing Sunday service, and I think we sort of worked out how we do that over the weeks. But we knew it was a time of difficulty, a time of worry and anxiety for many people. And so we wanted to pray lots. So we one of the key things I felt was really important was I was like, we need to be praying lots. Let's what's the best way to do that? So we set up at HTC Daily. We called it a daily prayer meeting, Monday to Friday, every morning, 8:30 for 20 minutes, a short Bible thought and 15 minutes of praying on Zoom. And pretty much straight away, we had over 100 people, or over 100 screens, so probably 150 people at the start, praying each day. And, if someone had said to me at the start of the year, you will have 150 of your church meeting for a daily prayer meeting and praying with passion to the Lord, I would have gone, revival's broken out. And actually, it was a crisis, the crisis that we are currently in, that caused that to happen. So in many ways, there have been lots of encouragements from it. So the sort of main pattern of what we did was a daily prayer meeting, Sunday service online, and then we're a church that's very much based on connect groups. We've got about 35, 40 connect groups that people are in that used to meet physically midweek, and so we were very much encouraged that to still happen, but virtually, and people to meet on Zoom in their connect groups, and produced a bit of teaching Wednesday evening to go out for the connect groups for them, then to chat and pray and have that connection time. But I think one other thing that I quickly realised was that it is a time of challenge for everyone's mental health, mental well-being, whatever word you want to use. And so we actually started this was part of the way of people contributing, was just going, actually, let's have we've called it HTC well-being, but just various different people giving various different sort of skills that they have to do all sorts of things that may be more fun, not overtly, this is Christian teaching, as it were, but just to help people. And we had some exercise classes, some cookery classes, a pub quiz each Saturday night and stuff like that, just to actually to be providing help for people. We've had one thing that's been quite popular with the parents. We've had a pandemic parenting session on Zoom, and each week just parents meeting and different people just sharing different tips about parenting, particularly in these pandemic times, as it were. So those kind of things. We haven't done it perfectly. There's plenty of things we got wrong. I haven't said everything, but hopefully that gives you a taster.
It's fantastic. I mean, imagine it's such a huge thing for a church that has multiple ministries going on during the week, a hive of activity, to then suddenly find that you're having to ask those questions of how do you do that in a completely different way. That is a huge logistical challenge. And when you've got 600 plus people who you're also trying to kind of look after and help, and all of them maybe with different needs and requirements, like that is how important has teamwork been throughout this kind of change?
Yeah, we quite a lot of the staff team. So we have a staff of about 20 people, including interns and things like that. So it's a fair few. The staff team have been fantastic, but it's meant quite a lot of flexibility and adaptability amongst the staff team in terms of their roles, because suddenly some people's roles, their job title would increase. Some people, it doesn't really exist anymore, as it were. So that sense of people being adaptable on the staff team in terms of what people are doing, people learning how to edit videos, because suddenly you need to do that a lot more than we've ever had to before, and all that kind of thing. We've had 3 people that most of their time we've sort of set up a pop-up food bank, so trying to reach out practically to those in need, who've basically been focused on that. We called it our HTC on-call ministry, and actually so suddenly we've been things that we were actually wanting to do but hadn't done yet. In a sense, this has been the catalyst for doing that. But we've had people being quite flexible in terms of their staff roles to meet the needs and the situation that we're in. So yes, there's been that sense of teamwork, and then I think as well there's the teamwork obviously just wider with the whole church family as a team, and different people just giving and contributing in different ways. But I think it's been one of the challenges too, because I've certainly found it. It's exposed my many weaknesses as a leader in terms of how do you manage a team of people when you're not seeing them, and sort of not. I felt at times like, how do I avoid, in sort of, Bond movies where there's, the baddie stroking his cat and in his chair from his lair and just barking out instructions. And I thought, how am I not like that, just sitting in my screen barking out instructions to the staff team? So it's tested me and challenged me in all sorts of ways.
You've just described my management style from my own team at Care. Yeah, they've been wondering the same question. I don't think I've been as successful as you've clearly been. But, I wonder if we could just look at this whole question of online church. And one of the phenomena that people have reported over the last 10 weeks is people are encountering Jesus for the first time, and a surge of increase on Google in terms of searching for prayer, a surge of increase in people searching for the name Jesus, and more people viewing online services than was happening 10, 11, 12 weeks ago. Has that been your experience at HTC as well? And are you excited by where you think that could lead?
Yes and no is the short answer. Yes, it has been our experience to a degree. So certainly there have been plenty of people engaged who weren't engaged before in the life of the church. I think those were the big headline facts. If one actually looks at what has happened since Easter time, particularly, I think most churches have probably seen a drop off, as have we, in terms of number of people. So there is, the whole Zoom fatigue. I think that is the case for a lot of churches. So that the online attendance is not as much as it was. But there's still been plenty of encouragements. There was, in fact, you mentioned my one particularly encouraging story. You mentioned, let me give two actually. You mentioned my book. There was some person in our church family who was reading the 100% Christianity book, and he would leave it on his table at work, his desk at work after he went home each evening. This is before coronavirus, and it turned out that another colleague, after he'd gone, would take the book and start reading it secretly.
Amazing.
And so she was starting reading. This colleague of his was starting reading the book, and then when lockdown happened, she was basically decided, actually, I wanted to do Alpha. And probably about a month and a half ago now, she became a Christian. So that was just, so encouraging to hear someone becoming a Christian through Alpha Online. And there's another person I can think of in our church family who had various health issues. She met someone in this health program that she was doing, and had started to share about Jesus with this person, and sort of done an informal Alpha course with them. And then she'd sent them links to our online service, not expecting this person to go and listen, but it turns out she did. But she also started joining our daily prayer meeting. This person, she also started joining our online Alpha course, and is going through the Alpha course at the moment on it. So there's real encouragements in terms of individuals, but there are also challenges as well. And I feel like the biggest challenge actually for us and the size of church we are is it's difficult to know exactly what is going on with everyone, and particularly if one thinks about the periphery of the church. I think it's sent people in one of two directions. For some who have been on the edge of the periphery of the church, maybe fairly new to the church, it has got them more involved, and you've seen them suddenly being involved in all these different things. You've seen them on the Zoom prayer meeting, whatever it may be, and that's been really exciting to see them grow. But there's other people you haven't seen at all, and you're like, I have no idea what's happening. I don't know where they are. And I saw a recent report that isn't so encouraging. There was a national survey. I can't actually remember who did it, but it was something along the lines of there was I think it was about 2,000 people that were surveyed of Christians, churchgoers, and the question was what percentage of them had listened to an online service in the last month? And I think it was only 40 or 50%. And of that 40 or 50% of churchgoers, I think 20% of those 40 or 50, actually they'd listen to online services of churches different to their regular church, as it were. So I think there are plenty of challenges of the sort of the consumer mindset taking hold, and that having challenges in terms of discipleship.
I guess one of the things that Christians are asking themselves, church leaders are asking themselves, is this whole question of evangelism and reaching out. If we feel like there's perhaps a slightly greater spiritual appetite in our communities than there has been, and we want to take advantage of that, in a right way, we want to reach out with the good news, and yet people, I think, feel maybe initially there was a burst of activity on that front and lots of excitement, as you've just identified. Now it's a bit of a weird time. It's like it's neither here nor there. It's not quite lockdown anymore, but it's certainly not freedom. So
yes,
in terms of your experience, your church's experience, how are you equipping and encouraging Christians to continue to be evangelists at a time like this?
Yeah, it's a great question. We want to put on courses, but courses are never the whole answer. So, we are running Alpha online, and actually my encouragement is that we keep on running that, because I think often people might friends or might express an interest because they see something or because they feel something during these time of where people are being asked all sorts of questions. And so to have Alpha keeping on going, so there's something to point people to as a course, that is a regular thing people can go to, I think that's a good thing. But obviously, evangelism is more than that. And I think the thing I was really helped with, one of my friends is Pat Allerton, who was the famous portable priest going around singing, giving Amazing Grace. And I did a little interview with him for one of our online services, and about all he'd been doing. And he had this really helpful phrase. He basically said, work out what is your rooftop to proclaim Jesus from. At the moment, less so now, but at the moment back then, for him, his rooftop was going around and proclaiming Jesus through playing Amazing Grace, through praying the Lord's Prayer, and giving a few sentences of gospel encouragement to all sorts of different places. And he got amazing media coverage. But we're not all him, but we do all have a rooftop to proclaim Jesus. And it may just be to one friend or one colleague, that maybe the people that we are in lockdown with, living in our house with. It may be, I personally was like, actually, this is a good time to get back in touch with a few friends of mine who aren't Christians or haven't seen for a long while, and just share some things with them and send them links to things. People are watching and looking at things more than normal. So there's certainly ways of sort of starting conversations going. And I think it's taking advantage of those friendships that one does have, and the uncertain times that we're in, which mean that people are asking bigger questions.
I must admit, when I first saw the clips of Pat out singing Amazing Grace, and it was phenomenal. But I'm sure, like many other Christians, I did also think to myself, yeah, it's all right for you, Pat. I think if I was to go and do that, it would have the opposite effect. There's nothing very kind of appealing about my singing voice that would draw people in. But
no, I think that's the thing. That we've each got to work out what is the rooftop for us, as it were, and what's for one thing is not for another person.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I think Christians, leaders, Christians of all different backgrounds are dealing with and grappling with is just the learning to live with uncertainty. I think about myself. I was due to get married in June, and we had to postpone everything. God's been so good to us. It's been relatively smooth in terms of everything slotting into a new date. But there'll be others who weddings have been suspended, holidays have been suspended. Some haven't seen their parents, their brothers, their sisters, nieces, nephews, whatever it might be. I mean, some of the incredible stories of parents not seeing their children.
That's right.
All of that going on. And so, faced as we are with this, like, what pastoral, practical advice or thoughts and reflections from your own experience and from others in your church would you like to share for Christians who right now might be watching this or listening to this and saying, I'm still feeling incredibly afraid about what the future is going to look like?
No, thank you for asking. I think the first thing is making sure encouraging people to talk. The worst situation is when people feel I haven't got an avenue to say, help, this is me, this is my struggles, these are what I'm feeling. So at the very simplest, it is encouraging people to talk. And that's why for us, we've gone, in a church our size, I can't talk to everybody. And so connect groups have got to be key. And that's why we've made a big push of, if you're not in a connect group, if you're more on the periphery of the church, get in a connect group, an online connect group. This is actually a time, even though you can't meet physically, it is a time that you need a connect group more than ever before. And certainly we've found that a lot of people are joining connect groups so that they have that place where it's just, this is how I'm feeling, this is what I'm struggling with. And for many of our connect groups, for many weeks, actually far more than normal, yes, there's a bit of Bible input, but actually it's been about just sharing, this is how I am, this is what I'm struggling with, let's pray for one another. And so that's my top, at its simplest, that is my top encouragement for people, to make sure they're not trying to go forwards alone. And that's the big danger in a time like this. I think, a key, for me, a key verse is in Philippians 4, verse 7, for the peace of God, which passes all understanding, guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. And that, that word guard there, it's got that idea of soldiers garrisoning, protecting, guarding it. So the peace of God guards our hearts and our minds. So the encouragement for people is actually, yes, there are all sorts of different things we can do talking to people. There's all sorts of pastoral counseling advice, all sorts of things. All those are good things and maybe very important for some people. But the most important thing that overrides it all is our relationship with the Lord. And as we spend time with him and are in love with him and feel passion for him, that then means that actually when other things go pear-shaped, when other things are uncertain, when other things are all crumbling, which they are at the moment, actually we can know God's peace guarding our heart and our mind, because that's the one thing that doesn't crumble. God, Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so where all things are crumbling in different ways, Jesus is the same yesterday, and today, and forever. And so we can hold on to him. And so that's the encouragement. But doing it in community is key. It is key.
And as you look to the future, lots of speculation about what's coming next, whether churches will be able to open.
Yeah, please tell me.
What, how are you going to decide if you're told you can have this many people in your church building?
Yes,
how you decide
exactly.
And all that. So as you look to the future, what do you think are going to be some of the ongoing challenges, I suppose, but in terms of, I guess, as you look to the future, what are you thinking of as you look to July and August, September, towards Christmas? What's going through your mind as you plan for the rest of 2020?
Yeah, thank you. Bottom line is, I've said you've got to remember, and I've said this to the staff team a lot, is we've got to remember, yes, lots has changed, but lots is still the same. So Jesus is still the same. The gospel is still the same. Our vision as a church, we say our vision is to see every life bearing fruit for Jesus. That is still the same. We have various little sort of models of how we want to try and put that into practice, and those things are still the same. So there's lots that's still the same, but yes, there are things that are different, and it's about working out with the parameters and the restrictions that we have. How can we best fulfill the vision that we believe God's given us? As we've talked about things, we've gone. We've said there are different stages in our heads. It's very simple. We are online only church at the moment. There will come a time when we are parallel church, that we will have a physical church service or services of some description, and we will also have an online service still going on, because there'll be plenty of people that will not want to come to church for all sorts of different reasons, whether it's because they're vulnerable, whether it's because they're afraid, whether it's because they're lazy, whatever it might be. And then there'll be the third stage is a new normal stage, which could be quite similar to parallel church, but hopefully we will work out. So there's that progression there. And as you say, there's so much unknown. It's very difficult to plan too far ahead. Someone gave me the analogy of, it's a bit like driving at night with your headlights on. With your headlights on, you can only see so far, and you go, right, what's the best plan for that? That those 200 meters that you can see, right, we'll drive that bit. And then when you get to that bit, then your headlights are a bit further. And it's a little bit like that. You're sort of having to plan a couple of weeks at a time and then see, right, let's do a rain check, let's work out what next. And so it is difficult to plan long term with any great sort of specificity. Yes, we know whenever we're allowed in the church building, there are going to be all sorts of restrictions and all sorts of social distancing things, and we've got to work out that. And that's in a sense the easy bit, but it's just strategically and practically what is the best thing for fulfilling the vision for us as a church. And I think I was reading an article the other day that was comparing different types of business. Now, there's things you can learn from business, but it's dangerous as saying church equals business. Of course, it doesn't. But saying basically, the article was saying actually the church going forwards is going to be more like Amazon, that is a digital thing with something of a physical presence, rather than it is at the moment, which is a physical thing with something of a digital presence. So a complete switch round. I'm not convinced by that totally is the right way to go. Although there's bound to be digital is going to be a bigger thing. But I'm a little bit nervous of, yes, a church is now primarily this digital thing, and it just happens to have a bit of an online, a bit of a physical presence because of the challenges to community and contribution and real relationship. Relationship is what life is all about. Relationship with God through Jesus, leading to a relationship with one another. And so I'm a little bit nervous about that, but undoubtedly there are things that we're going to have to think through that will mean radical changes.
Yeah. Jago, look, we barely scratched the surface of some of these sort of massive questions, but I just want to say thank you so much for sharing, taking the time to come and join us, and really appreciate all that you've shared and the insights that you've got, and just hope that God keeps blessing you and Holy Trinity Clapham, all that you're doing. And wonder if you could perhaps just finish by sharing, you mentioned Philippians 4 already, those great words. If there was one other bit of God's word, one other verse maybe, or one other thought that has really stayed with you over these 10 weeks or so, I wonder if you could just share something on that as we kind of finish.
Very good question. The verse that is actually most in my head at the moment is more, I think, connected to the whole situation of racism with George Floyd's death, and it's just a simple verse where Paul says in 1 Corinthians 12, if one part suffers, every part suffers. And just that recognition, it's been a challenge to me. It's been a conviction to me where I've been too apathetic about racial injustice, where I've been silent, and actually just going, if one part suffers, every part suffers. There's a lady in our church, she's in her 20s, she's black, and she said to me, she basically said when she sees the image of George Floyd's death, and as she looks at it, she sees in him her father or brother or nephew, and she's outraged. And that's her as a black person. So much so it should be exactly the same for me as a white person, or anyone else in our church should feel exactly the same outrage at what is happening. And it was just a really striking thing that she said to me. And that was that real sense of, if one part suffers, every part suffers. And just thinking through, humbly, thinking through uncertainly, thinking through knowing I've got so much to learn, so much to grow in this area. What does it look like to be rightly angry, but anger not leading to sin at racial injustice, but to be rightly courageous in one's response to that, as one seeks and prays for racial justice and racial harmony. One seeks for an end to discrimination, seeks for reconciliation to happen. So at the moment, that's the one verse that's particularly just whirring around my head. If one part suffers, every part suffers.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Jago, thanks for coming on the podcast.
No, well, thank you. And thank you for all that CARE does. I'm really, really grateful for all that you guys do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Remember to subscribe to get the latest episodes and find out more about the work of CARE on care.org.uk. CARE, for what you believe.